Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of HostGator's Web Pro series. My name is Andres Calvin. I'm the digital analyst at HostGator.com. Today, I want to discuss with you guys one of the most important topics in the field of digital analytics, the sales funnel. However, before we get started with that, let's answer the question, what is digital analytics? So digital analytics is defined as the analysis of qualitative and quantitative data from your business and the competition to drive a continual improvement of the online experience that your customers and potential customers have, which translates to your desired outcomes, both online and offline. This was a definition coined by Avinash Kaushik, the web analytics evangelist at Google. He's also the author of several books and the blog Occam's Razor, which I highly recommend you check out if you're interested in the field of digital analytics. To summarize, what this definition is saying is that digital analytics is the use of users' website behaviors for the purpose of improving your users' experience on your site. Now, when the experience of your users on your site is good, this usually translates into better outcomes for your business. So that's why it's important to continually improve it. Now that we've defined digital analytics, let's define the sales funnel. Now, according to Wikipedia, the sales funnel, also known as the revenue funnel or sales process or marketing funnel, it goes by several names, refers to the buying process that companies lead customers through when purchasing products. Now, this is a more traditional definition. I like to think of a sales funnel as not just leading customers through to a purchase, but to any conversion that's of interest to your business. This could include for a blog downloading a piece of content or signing up for an email newsletter. Now, if you Google sales funnel, the term sales funnel, you'll see tons of different variations. However, at the end of the day, they're pretty much based on the same premise, which is a series of subsequent steps that a user takes before reaching an ultimate conclusion, such as an order or downloading a specific piece of content or signing up for a newsletter. Now, here's one example that I like by Amber Creative, because it has the traditional sales funnel, starting with lead generation, translating those leads into prospects, warming those prospects into opportunities, and then eventually closing those opportunities to create a new customer. Now, in addition to the four traditional sales steps, you also have this translation into what these steps would look like for a marketing funnel. So these four steps are awareness, interest, decision, and action. So these are different things that we want users to do as they progress closer to making an ultimate purchase. Now, for each of these steps, you'll see that we have listed some marketing strategies that can be used to drive or improve our success in each of these steps. For driving awareness, for example, when we're trying to get more people aware of our brand and our product, we might leverage the use of content marketing, social media marketing, digital paid advertisements, organic search optimizations, and PR. Now, there's also equivalent strategies here and these other steps that we might do as a user progresses through the funnel. Now, as I said, these steps aren't set in stone. So, take the opportunity to think about this conceptually for your business and see what are the steps that you would like to see your customers take on your site. And what's the ultimate outcome that you would like them to take? Another variation of the sales funnel is one that I personally use here at HostGator, and that's the e-commerce sales funnel. Now, the steps in this funnel, as you'll see, are a little different. And they start with all of the users that come to our site, so total sessions of our site, right? Followed by the sessions of the total that make it to the product page. Of those, which sessions make it to adding a product to the cart. And finally, which of these sessions ultimately make a successful purchase. So this is a slight more e-commerce oriented definition of the sales funnel, and it's one that we'll be looking at here today using some demo data. So now that we've defined the e-commerce sales funnel, let's talk about how to specifically apply this analysis within Google Analytics. Now, there's several ways of doing this, but one of my favorite ways is through the use of custom segments. Now, segmentation is essentially the concept of filtering down all of your sessions to those users that meet a certain list of predefined conditions. A segment can consist of users coming to the site via a specific channel, device, or country, or even users that complete a specific action, such as reaching a particular page or purchasing a product, similar to the steps in our funnel. So going back to our funnel, if we go back, we'll see that we want to create a segment for each of these steps of the funnel. So we want to look at all of our sessions, the sessions that reached the product page, the sessions that added something to the cart, and the sessions that completed with the transaction. So these are essentially the conditions that we'll want to create in our segments to create these funnel steps. So for the purpose of our tutorial today, we're going to be leveraging Google's open source Google Merchandise Store data. Now, before continuing with this tutorial, I highly recommend that you navigate to shop.googlemerchandisestore.com and take a look at your site yourself. Now, the reason why this is helpful is because it'll make a lot more sense as I'm going through this tutorial, which pages, match up with each of the funnel steps. Now, that being said, I did some research beforehand, and I took a look at which steps of the funnel are relevant for the Google Merchandise Store. Now, essentially, it amounts to 6 steps. So the first step is users that make it to the home page. The second is users that see product results, which essentially is just like a listing of products, similar to Amazon after you do an Amazon search. 3 is the cart, so how many users added a product to the cart. 4 is how many users made it to the checkout portion of the cart. 5 is how many users made it to payment info. Again, steps 3 to 5 are on different pages, which is why I broke them out like that, so we can see how many people drop off in each of those stages. And lastly, order success, or reaching the thank you page or the order completed page, is the final step of the funnel. All right, so enough background. Let's get right down to building these segments in Google Analytics. Now, to do so, let me just open up my Google Analytics instance here. As you'll see, once you create a Google Analytics account, if you don't have one already, you'll notice that there's a demo account, analytics account here with a property with the name of Google Merchandise Store. And lastly, 3 views. Now we're going to use the master view for our purposes here. So now that I have Google Analytics open, you'll notice up top here that is kind of what I call, I guess, the segment window. You'll see by default that Google Analytics applies the all users segment to the report that you're looking at. Now, the all users segment essentially has no condition whatsoever. It just comprises of all of the users on your site. Now, it's helpful sometimes to include the segment here so you can compare it to any new segments that you create. So to create a segment, we click Add Segment in this opaque Add Segment button here, and we create New Segment. You'll see that I have several segments already created, but today we're going to create a new segment for these. So as you'll see, when I open up this segment menu, there's a series of different options here on the left-hand side. Now these are all different criteria that I can use to create my segment. Now Google's nicely broken that out into different themes. So you'll see demographics, which includes age, gender, language, affinity, location, some other dimensions here as well. Technology, which looks at the operating system, the browser, the type of device that a user is doing, coming to the site on. Behavior, which looks at how many sessions that user has had on your site, how many days since that last session, how many transactions, session duration, etc. And there's a couple of other options here. You can look at traffic sources, enhance e-commerce behavior. But today what we're going to use is under this advanced section, conditions, right? So what we're going to do here in the conditions section of the segment, right, is we're going to click on this drop down and we're going to type in page. It might also be called page path in your Google Analytics setup, depending on how you've done that. Now for our purposes, if you'll recall, our first step of our funnel is the /home page. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a segment of users with a page. We can either do contains to include what looks like the second version of the home page, or we could do an exact match so that we only include that /home. Now to make things simple, I'll just do contains. That way we're ensure that we're including all versions of the home page. This might be the case if you were doing home page testing, A/B testing, that kind of thing. Now we're going to call our segment step 1 reach home page. So this is our first segment of our e-commerce sales funnel. Now we're going to wait for this to load, and then we're going to do the same thing for the other remaining 5 steps. So the second step, so we're going to click new segment, this red new segment button again here. We're going to call this step 2 reach product results. We're going to go to conditions, the drop down here, type in page path. Essentially what this is saying is that we want to include all sessions where the user reached this page at some point in the session. Now I already know what the page name is, so I'm going to do store.html. For this purpose, I'm going to do exact match because it looks like there were a couple other options here that I'm not familiar with. We're going to click save. Now, before I do that, actually, you'll notice that there's some options here at the top. So you can actually filter not just on sessions, but also on users. Now, this is a little bit more complex, but essentially what this will do is it'll go back in time and see if a user has ever done the behavior that you've specified here within the last 30 days. So it'll stitch together multiple sessions that user has conducted. We can also inversely exclude people that meet this certain condition instead of just including them. But we won't be doing that now. But I figured I would give you guys a head up on that functionality in case it was relevant to you. So then we'll click save. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the other 4 segments, but I'll speed up through that so that you guys don't have to, bear with me on that. All right, guys. Well, thanks for waiting. So you can see I've created the remaining segments here. I have a segment for each of the steps in our funnel. I only have 4 up here, and the reason why is that Google Analytics by default only allows you to implement 4 segments in each of their reports. So you'll see that there are still 2 other segments here that are not selected, and that's because I've maxed out on the number of segments that I can use. However, they're still available for me to use if I were to remove 2 of these. So for example, if I uncheck these 2, I can replace them with the last 2 steps here. Now, that being said, we've essentially done 90% of the work here. So we've created the segments for each of the funnel steps, and now we're able to use these segments freely in any of the reporting here in Google Analytics. So one of the most interesting things I like to do is look to see which channel is driving sessions for each of these segments. So for example, we can drill down here. First of all, we can see this nice summary table that looks at how many users, sessions, transactions, the conversion rate, revenue are associated with these different segments. Now, as you can see, the number of sessions decreases as we go down the funnel, which we would expect as more people fall out, but the conversion rate increases significantly. So that's not surprising. As people that reach the lower steps of the funnel are getting closer to the ultimate conversion, right? Now, we can also export this data. And one of the most interesting things that we can do with it, in addition to breaking it down by all of the dimensions that are native to Google Analytics, is that we can calculate funnel retention and fallout rates. Now, that's essentially what these percentages are here. What they mean is, what this is doing is it's looking at how many sessions made it to a product page out of the percentage of total sessions that came into the site. So in this case, it's about 43%. So 43% of people made it to the subsequent step. 14.5% of the total sessions made it to the add to cart step. And lastly, only 3.3% of sessions have a transaction. So essentially your conversion rate right there. Now we can calculate funnel retention like this using the total number of sessions, but we can also calculate the percentage from step to step, which is, I think, one of the most useful analyses because it tells you the areas of friction on your site or where users are getting stuck and essentially focuses your attention on these areas so that you can improve and optimize them and remove that friction. So we can do all of this with the segments that we've created. We simply export the file from Google Analytics, like a CSV file, and we try to calculate these percentages by dividing the session that we're interested in by either the previous step or the total sessions at the top in the topmost step. So now that we've looked at a completed funnel, let's go back to our Google Analytics instance and see how do we actually go about building one from scratch. So going back to Google Analytics, we're back in our, all traffic channels view. We have the first four step segments applied here, right? So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and export this data out of Google Analytics. Now there's a couple ways we can do that. We can click on this export button. As you can see, there's several different alternatives on how to pull this data. We can export it to Google Sheets, into a CSV file or an Excel file. Personally, CSV files are my favorite, just because right now we're going to have to do a little bit of pre-processing first to join these four segments with the remaining ones, which is a little bit easier to do, I think, in the CSV file. So you can see here we're exporting the CSV. We've downloaded it here. Let's open it up and see what it looks like. So as you can see, there's a lot of noise here in the CSV file. We're going to do some cleaning up first. So let's just widen these columns here. We can do that by just a quick hot tip. If you do Control A on a PC and then Alt H O I, you can see it's just a hotkey to extend these columns. You can also select all of them, double click on the column width, and that'll resort it as well. So we're going to clean up some of these columns here. As you can see, we have our segment. This one's important. We also have channel, which is important if we want to look at how the different channels compare to each other as far as their funnel performance. We have this date range, which we can keep. For our example, I don't think we really need it right now. If we were doing something that was taking a look at performance over time, we might need that. Next, we're going to get rid of all of these other columns here. Now we have sessions. Now these are just like subtotals, as well as the data behind the graph here, which we don't need. So the next thing we're going to do, so that's our four segments right there. Now we need our last two. So let's go back here and select our last two segments, payment info and order success. Hit apply. We'll do the same thing. We'll export this as a CSV file. Now, if I only had four segments, I wouldn't have to do this step twice, but fortunately we can only use four segments at a time in GA. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did last time. So we're going to remove the date range, everything with the exception of sessions. I probably could have done this a little easier using a custom report, but I won't get into that here now. Next, we're going to copy all this data here. The rest of it is just subtotals, so we don't need to worry about that. We'll go back into our first file that had the prior four steps, and now we have a complete data set with all the channels, all of our 6 segments, and the number of sessions within each one between the time period of September 1st to September 30th of this year. So let's just get rid of that. Let's get rid of grid lines. Just a personal thing. I'm not a fan of grid lines. Then I'm just going to add borders to my cells. so that they're clearly distinguished. Let's bold that. So now we can call this data. So now we have our data in this tab. The next step, what we want to do is we would like to create a pivot table. So we do insert pivot table. Just do OK here. And now this is where we start to build the final funnel. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to include sessions here in the values. And then in the rows, we're going to want to include, the segments. So now here we have our segments, one for each step. So we can rename this funnel step. And we can rename this total sessions. Just a formatting thing. We'll just change the number format so that has a comma for the thousands, 0 decimals. There we go. Cleans it up a little bit. We can also center this column. Okay. We're also not going to need a grand total here. We can also get rid of these grid lines so it's a little cleaner. Add in the borders. There we go. So now we got pretty much the beginning stages of a funnel report here. Now, if we want to see retention, the retention rates, we'll call this one retention prior step. And we can call this retention first step. So this will give us what percentage of users have reached each consecutive step, both what proportion, both from the prior step as well as all the way from the first step. So for the prior step, for step 1, we're not going to have anything here. And the percentage here is going to be 100% as well, because it's the first step, so there was no fallout. So, but for the rest of the steps, what we're going to use is a handy formula here. So we're going to type in, because it's a pivot table, so it's a little tough to reference pivots in formulas. We're going to do B4, which is this cell right here, it's pointing at here, divided by B4 again, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to fix the reference. And the way we do that is we use function F4 to fix the reference so that we don't want this formula, this denominator, to move at all, right? So you'll see why that's important. Now the other thing we're going to want to do is center that, make it into a percentage. And now we can drag or copy and paste this formula down. Another way to do that is just double click here in the bottom right corner. That'll drag the formula down. Now, as you can see here, as we move down, this formula is going to start to take the number of sessions in each step and divide it by the first step. So this is essentially telling us what percentage of people have made it to this step out of the total number of people that came to the site. Now that's essentially similar to in the deck that we were looking at, the funnel that was there. Now this is interesting. I mean, it essentially tells you that there's a lot of drop off here from the home page to the product page, so this might be one area of friction as well. Not a lot of drop off from the product page to the cart, so look what we're doing well there, and then a lot of drop off as well from the cart to the checkout. So if this were my site, I would try to focus on the rates in these two steps and try to see what can I do to reduce friction here. Is there some sort of reason or indicator in the data that can explain why we're losing so many people? Now from here in our column C for retention and prior step, what we're going to do is we're going to take B5 and divide it by B4. So in other words, step 2 divided by step 1. And we're not going to put any formula here in this first step because there's no fall off, like I said before. Now what we can do is we can just quickly take the format from this cell, apply it here. It'll change it into a percentage. As we'll see for the first step, these two percentages are the same because they're essentially doing the same calculation. But as we drag this formula down, we can either paste it or double click here, you'll see that the percentages differ from the column on the right. Now, what this is telling us is what percentage of people have we retained from the prior steps. So again, 18% of people were retained from the home page to the product page. From there, we've retained 80% of the product pages have made it to the cart. So we're doing really well here. From there, only 15% of people are making it to the checkout from the cart pages. So this looks like, another big area of friction. It's essentially, telling a very similar story here, but it's just a lot easier to see. These are definitely our two major areas of fallout. When someone makes it to the checkout, the likelihood that they get to payment info is really high as well. So it's like 67%. And then lastly, again, we see a large dropout from payment info to order success. So something is going on here in this payment info step. Either this is where the user's seeing the final total price, although I think in checkout, it would summarize the order price. So I'm not sure if that hypothesis is true, but essentially what we'd want to do is drill down into these three steps and figure out what is it that's causing friction. Why are people dropping off? Because that's where we're losing most of our customers. So yeah, this is a really, quick and dirty way to do funnel analysis. Sorry about that. To do a funnel analysis from Google Analytics. So thanks for joining us today, and I hope that you find this helpful and are able to apply it to your business going forward. Again, thanks for joining us here at the HostGator Web Pro Series. Have a good one.